Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's live presentation for Science Expeditions. Or I know there have been some other live presentations today, but right now we're going to talk about bacteria and where we might find them in the environment. And some of you may have seen my pre-recorded video that was posted on the Science Expedition website earlier. And in it, I talked about how we can actually find bacteria all over the place. So we can find them in nature, we can find them in our bodies. And bacteria are super useful and important to how the world works. In some cases, we actually use bacteria to help us make food or to help us make beverages or to help us make materials. For instance, I'm in a lab in the Wisconsin Energy Institute where we use bacteria to help us turn plants into biofuels, which then you might be able to use your car on these biofuels instead of burning gasoline from the ground. So bacteria are super useful for us, and studying bacteria and studying where they live and what they like to eat and other things is a really important part of science and one thing that a lot of scientists dedicate their time to. So one of the things I posed in the video, the pre-recorded video that I sent out, was a survey that allowed you to tell me where you would like me to sample for bacteria um, around the UW campus. So thank you to everyone who filled out that survey and sent me those results. So yesterday, what I did is in the afternoon, I biked around campus and took Petri dishes with me, and along with some Q-tips. And at these different places that you see on the list up in the slide, I took my Q-tip, I rubbed it around the place. So let's say it was tree bark. I would take a Q-tip, rub it along the tree bark, and then open up a plate labeled tree bark, and then I would rub the Q-tip all around that plate. Then, after I was done getting all of the samples, I came back to the lab and put all of these plates in an incubator. And what an incubator does is it's just a nice warm place that bacteria really like to grow in. So once the bacteria end up on these plates and I put them in the incubator, they're going to start chewing away at this food, which is what the plate is made of, called agar. So the bacteria are going to sit on that agar in that nice warm incubator and eat up that food overnight. And they'll grow and divide and divide and divide and divide. So eventually, what starts as just one single tiny bacteria that we can't see with our eyes, it grows and grows and divides until it becomes a big mound, which is known as a colony. So we can actually see some colonies on these plates. Like here, you can see two nice big colonies that grew up overnight in the incubator. So what we're going to do today is take a look at these different plates that you all recommended I sample. And we're going to try to make some comparisons about what we see on the different plates and why we think there might be those differences. So the first thing I want to do is ask that those of you watching make predictions. So based on this list, which I have on the screen of where I sampled, I want you to go ahead and type in the comments of the live stream, where do you think there will be the most bacteria? And where do you think might be the least bacteria? So I'm going to give everyone some time here, maybe about 2 minutes. And I want you to type in the live stream comments. Where do you think we will see the most bacteria and where do you think we'll see the least? And then some of my helpers today, I have Brianna helping me out today to look at those live stream comments. She is going to let me know what some of your predictions are, and then we'll go ahead and look at those plates. So again, I want everyone to take about 2 minutes to type in your predictions for bacteria at these different locations.
All right, we have one person who responded and they said open air. So I'm not sure if that was for most bacteria or least bacteria, but that is one suggestion. And somebody else responded and said, my fifth grader thinks the phone screen will have the most and the open air will have the least.
Okay, so we've got two people noting open air. Let me get that one ready to look at. And then we had a phone screen predicted as the most. These are great predictions. So keep them coming, everyone watching. And for those of you who already typed in your predictions, if you want to go ahead and maybe write a follow-up sentence on why do we think those might have the most or the least bacteria. So if you already sent in a prediction, go ahead and type a follow-up of why that might have the most or the least bacteria. And Brianna, you can keep reporting them as they come in. Thank you.
All right, so we have Chris B who says phone screen for the most and pillowcase for the least. And then another one says open air is the least and doorknob is the most. And another person says most will be the bottom of the shoe.
All right, great. Yeah, these are all great predictions. So we're going to take a look at these plates. And again, for those of you who just recently submitted those predictions, go ahead and take a second, maybe type a sentence about why you think those would have the most or least bacteria. So what about those locations led you to pick those?
Another one that just came in says, my fourth grader thinks there will be the most on the bottom of a shoe and the least on Abe Lincoln.
Okay, so we got Abe Lincoln prediction in there too to add. Yeah, these are great. Keep them coming, everyone. They're really interesting. And we'll take a look at all of these. We'll take a look at all of these. But yeah, go ahead, Brianna. Sorry.
This person sent in their explanation and said the phone screen has the most because it has the most contact or touches, and open air might have the least because it has the most space for bacteria to be distributed.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So those are both great points brought up. So thank you to that viewer for sharing. The phone screen gets touched a lot. That's true. I'm on my phone, a lot of every day, as some people I'm sure can relate to. So one thing we know from studying bacteria is that the human skin, so all over our skin, bacteria live harmoniously with them. So bacteria are all over our skin all of the time, and they're just fine, happy to be there, and they don't cause us problems. So maybe there are some bacteria on my finger that I might be putting on my phone all the time. So yeah, that's a great prediction. And then open air, like the viewer said, is a very open space for bacteria to be distributed. So maybe just by leaving my plate out and trying to let some bacteria land on the plate, maybe the bacteria were so far apart that none of them happened to end up on my plate, or very few. So I think that's also a great prediction. So thank you for sharing that. Any other predictions or explanations, Brianna?
Yes, another prediction is doorknob most and pillowcase least. That's from a first grader. And then somebody explained that there might be the most on the shoe because it travels around into many environments. And another person said, reason for the bottom of the shoe is that there's the most contact, least for Abraham Lincoln because it is bigger and people can only touch the bottom.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the shoe, bottom of the shoe first. So it sounds like we had some viewers saying, bottom of the shoe travels around and ends up touching a lot of surfaces. So I sampled the bottom of my hiking shoes. So I've been in dirt, I've been on roads, I've been in mud. So I think it seems like a really reasonable guess that there could be a lot of bacteria that like to live on those different environments that would end up on the bottom of my shoe. So we'll take a look at that in a second. And then the Abe Lincoln statue is pretty high up, so it would be hard to reach. So I actually tried to sample part of the statue that was, I think it was his left foot, which is the part of the statue that most people can rub because you can tell it's nice and shiny in that spot. So I tried to sample that spot. So we'll see if anything grew there. Any more that came in, Brianna?
No more yet.
Okay, so I think let's start taking a look at these different plates. So we had multiple people that guessed the phone screen would have a lot of bacteria, and this was actually a really popular place from the survey that people wanted me to test. So here is what the phone screen looked like, and I have to hold it in front of my face or else it disappears if it's out in the open. So in front of my face, we can actually see there's not really hardly anything on this plate. There's one colony right here. So you can see there's this white dot that I'm trying to put my finger behind. So we did see one colony of bacteria here, and there's a couple more that I can see, but I can't really see them through the camera because they're so faint and so small. But I do see a couple on here. So this was surprising to me, and based on the explanations you guys gave, I touch my phone screen all the time. So only seeing a couple was pretty surprising, and they're very small. But we'll talk about what reasons for this might be. So that's the phone screen. So let's get another one that people guess. So here is doorknob. So here is a doorknob. So we've got one nice big colony in the corner here that I point out with my finger. And then we have another up here. Let's see. Oh, you can see it if we hold it in front of my hair because it's a dark background. So we've got another one up here, another couple off to the side here. So it looks like the doorknob is about on the same order as the phone screen, where we see a couple of colonies, but it's definitely not covering the whole plate. Next, let's look at the bottom of my shoe. So here we see a lot more. So it's obvious right from the get-go that there are a lot more colonies that showed up on this plate. So we can see they vary in size and they also vary in color. So we have some that are more yellow, like right where my finger is. And then we have others that are more whitish. So, these two right next to each other. We have one that looks a little more yellow and one that looks a little more white. And this reflects the natural diversity of bacteria out in nature. So there are, thousands or millions of different kinds of bacteria that live out in the world. And all of them, just like how there are different animals, like there are humans, there are chickens, horses, there are bugs, just like how there are all those different kinds of animals, there are also all different kinds of bacteria. And some of them are different colors, and some of them grow in different ways. So we can see, let's see if we can see this on the camera. This one is nice and fuzzy and doesn't really have a clear circle around it. So that tells us that that's probably also a different kind of bacteria than, say, this nice perfect circle over next to it. Even though they're the same color, they grow in different ways. So that's another way that we can tell different bacteria apart. So bottom of the shoe definitely looks like, I've been walking around in many different environments. So that's a fun one. And we can look more at this plate if people have questions or want to go back to it. So now let's go to some of the least examples. We can start with the open air. I think a couple people guessed this. And sure enough, it doesn't really look like I got any bacteria in the time I was sampling. There are a couple actually along the bottom edge. So you can barely see those tiny dots right along the edge there. So it seems like we might have actually gotten some bacteria out of the air. which is interesting, but it doesn't look like they're all over the plate. So this is something, bacteria do live in the air, and different bacteria will live in different places. So I took this open air sample when I was outdoors near the Abe Lincoln statue. And I just let this plate sit open for 5 minutes outside. Now, if we would have done the same experiment in an enclosed space, like maybe if I had gone to a cave by a river, or maybe if I had let this sit out in a closed bathroom for 5 minutes, we probably would have seen different results because different bacteria like to live in those different places. Let's look at some of the other ones. We also had the pillowcase was brought up. So here on the pillowcase, it looks like we just saw one main colony that showed up on the plate after sampling this pillowcase. So if I look around at the rest of the plate, doesn't look like we have anything else in here. And some of you might notice this big splotch on the plate. And that's actually my fault. When I was using the Q-tip, I stabbed the plate too hard. So I ended up just messing up the auger. But the bacterial colony is this circle that we see right here. Okay, and I think the last one that people had mentioned in their guesses was the Abe statue. So again, I sampled his foot, and here's what we see. I got two nice big colonies. Again, slightly different shapes. This one is a little less circular than this one. And then we also have, if the camera will show it up, we have this colony that's sort of fuzzy, doesn't really have a nice circular shape. And then we have some smaller colonies off to the side of these. So it actually looks like the Abe Lincoln statue had more colonies than, say, the open air or the pillowcase around it. And even in this experiment, it had more colonies than the phone sample. So the Abe statue is on top here, a couple colonies. The phone sample is on the bottom, in which we maybe saw one colony. So yeah, this is really interesting. It seems that the bottom of the shoe definitely had lots of bacteria, but some of the ones that we didn't expect to have bacteria did have some, like the Abe statue, but it does have less, so maybe that still is in line with our predictions. And then some of the areas we predicted there to be a lot of bacteria, like the phone screen, really did not show up with many bacteria growing on that puppet. So now I'm going to have us look at some of the other samples that people didn't mention. So first, I'm going to show us the bathroom faucet sample. And again, with this one, I did not notice many colonies on here. There is one tiny one where I'm pointing with my finger. Hard to see on the camera, but maybe a couple more really small ones. Oh yeah, you can't see this one on the camera. So bathroom faucet was another one that might be expected to have many bacteria because it's high touch surface. People are touching this every time when they wash their hands after using the restroom. Next, though, we'll look at tree bark. So this one, I took a Q-tip up to some tree bark and then sampled it that way. But surprising to me, I did not really see many bacteria growing on that. There was one, looks like there's maybe one area of growth here, which is very hard to see on the camera. But you can sort of see it as like a brown spot in front of my finger. So maybe we did get something there. But again, maybe not as many as I would have expected for being out in nature. And last but certainly not least, we have the lakeshore. So for this sample, I took a Q-tip and basically stuck it in the mud near the lakeshore of Lake Mendota, and then plated this. And wow, were there a lot of bacteria in this sample. So here we can see not only are there lots and lots of bacteria, but they're also all different kinds. So we can see at least 2 different colors on here. Probably more if we look carefully, but there's some yellows, some oranges, some whites, and maybe some cream colored bacteria. I will point out this big brown speck is just a piece of twig from the ground. So that was there when I made the sample. That's not bacteria growing, but the rest of these streaks, this is all bacteria. And what I think is especially cool is you can actually see where my Q-tip went. So you can actually follow the Q-tip strokes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on this plate because the bacteria show you where that was. So Lakeshore definitely had the most bacteria out of all of the samples. So now I want to pose another question to the viewers. So please type in your guesses or responses into the YouTube live stream. My question is, why do we think some places that are high touch surfaces that we might have expected there to be a lot of bacteria, why do we think we ended up with little to nothing? So this is the phone screen, for example. And even if we look at samples from nature, like the lakeshore versus tree bark. So the lakeshore tells us there are bacteria, lots of bacteria in nature. So the tree bark, maybe there should be lots of bacteria on the tree bark too. So why might there be these differences? Go ahead and take a minute or two, type what you're thinking in the live stream. And then Brianna, if you want to let me know as predictions come in, that would be great.
All right, we have one response so far from a 4th grader, and they said that they like some environments better than others.
Right. Yeah. So there's 2 important parts to this point. So thank you for that response. So bacteria do like certain environments better than others. And specific bacteria have the specific environments that they like to be in. So from this experiment, we can say it appears to us that bacteria really like the muddy lake. And maybe they don't like my phone screen too much, which again, this is from the phone screen. So if I can ask for a follow-up, think about what's different about the muddy lakeshore versus the phone screen that bacteria might like more than another. And as you think about that question, I'm also going to talk about bacteria. Since they like different environments, they actually prefer different food to eat. So I mentioned in my video and at the beginning of this talk that these agar plates are covered in a layer of food. But as with, say, broccoli, not all people really like to eat broccoli. In fact, a lot of people really don't like broccoli. And the same thing is true for this food on the plate. Some bacteria are really going to like this food, and some bacteria are not going to like this food at all, so they won't grow. So maybe lots of these bacteria from the lake just really like the food that I gave them. And the phone screen, maybe this just wasn't the right food. So if I went and repeated this experiment and tried with a different kind of food, we might actually see that this plate from the phone screen gets covered in bacteria. So yeah, that's a really important point, is that different bacteria like to live in different places and they like to eat different foods. So doing this experiment, we're only going to see the bacteria that like to eat this food. So if we really want to see all of the bacteria, we have to go out there and basically offer them a feast of all of the different foods, and we can see which bacteria grow on which type of food.
All right, we've got some more comments coming in. So somebody mentioned differences in light water and delicious bacteria food might cause this diversity. And a lot of people are saying that bacteria thrives or really likes wet environments. We have a first grader who says bacteria like the dark. And then we have one question, and they're wondering if your hiking shoes walked on the lake shore, and maybe that's why there's some similarities there.
Oh, yeah. So these are all great comments, and that was also a great question. So I'm going to try to address the comments first. And if I forget any of them, Brianna, you can just let me know afterwards. So also another thing I want to note is feel free, everyone, to post your questions in the YouTube comments live stream, and Brianna will relay them to me as we wrap up here. So yes, bacteria do tend to like wet environments. Like we do, we always need water to survive, and the same is true of bacteria. So bacteria will need water to survive, but again, they'll need different amounts. So, but generally speaking, wet or humid environments are pretty good places for bacteria to live. And then I think we had one comment that said bacteria like light, and another comment that said bacteria like to live in the dark. And both of these are true, right? Some bacteria really like living in the light. In fact, some bacteria are actually photosynthetic, which means just like plants, they can absorb sunlight and turn that light into food and energy. So some bacteria need sunlight to even live, whereas other bacteria prefer to stay away from the sunlight and prefer to stay in those dark places and not be harmed by the sun's rays. So bacteria do like to live in both the sun and in the dark. And then there was a question about whether my shoes had been on the lakeshore, and that might be why we see some similarity. So let me bring up both of these plates again so we can look at them. So here we have the lakeshore, and here we have the bottom of my shoe. So we definitely, in both of these, we have different colors, we have different shapes, and both of these also have the most bacteria compared to the other one. So I think that was a great prediction, is that maybe I had walked on the lakeshore before I had sampled the bottom of my shoe. In this case, I actually did not walk on the lakeshore yesterday because I took my shoe sample before I went out to the lakeshore. But I have walked on the lakeshore in the past in those shoes. So some bacteria can survive in certain environments even without food for a long time. So I might have picked up these bacteria on the bottom of my shoe. I might have picked these up yesterday. I might have picked these up 2 days ago, a week ago, who knows? So, and they were just waiting on the bottom of my shoe for the right time and the right food before they started growing again. So that was a great prediction. Brianna, are there any other questions or comments coming in?
Not yet. Oh,
okay.
One just popped in and said, can you talk about bacteria in the human body versus cells?
Sure. Yeah. So bacteria in the human body versus cells. So I think first I'll talk a little bit about what a cell is. So a cell is like the smallest unit of life, where it's an enclosed space that has genetic material, so DNA, which has the instructions to make the cell and to make a body in the case of humans. And it also has some sort of membrane that holds it all together. So bacteria also exist as cells, but they exist as single cells, which means the bacteria is only one little cell. So it's one little membrane with its genetics in the middle, and that is the entire bacterium. And it can live by itself, or it can divide and make more. Whereas humans, our bodies are actually made up of trillions of cells. So Our skin, for example, is a bunch of skin cells all laying next to each other and held together to form our skin. In our body, there are lots of bacteria, as the viewer mentioned. So these bacteria live in our mouths, on our skin, in our guts, so like in our small intestine and large intestine. They live all over us, and they help us do many things. For example, the bacteria in our gut will actually help us break down certain foods. The difference between the bacterial cells and our human cells is about that genetic information stored inside them. The bacteria cells has information that says, this is a bacteria, here's how you make more bacteria. Whereas our cells have the information saying, this is a human cell, here's the information to make more human cells. And another difference between the two is that bacterial cells are generally much, much smaller than human cells. So I think it's on the order of 10 times smaller. So if we think of a human cell as being this big, maybe a bacterial cell is, something really small compared to that size. But that can vary pretty widely. Any other comments or questions coming in, Brianna?
Not yet.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just wait about 30 more seconds if anyone has any final comments. But if not, it's a little past 2:30, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today to look at these different samples. And I also want to thank everyone for filling out that survey. It was a lot of fun collecting these and to see what where people wanted me to go. So thanks everyone for participating. If you have any remaining questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and I'll stick around for another 30 seconds or minute or two to answer those. But if not,
We do
everyone
have
have a great
another
weekend.
question from a first grader asking, what bacteria makes blue-green algae in the water?
Yeah, so blue-green algae are a type of, or some blue-green algae is a type of cyanobacteria. So the name is cyan, like the color cyan, and then an O, and then bacteria. So these bacteria are a group that are photosynthetic. So I mentioned earlier, some bacteria actually really like sunlight because they use the sun to make energy and food for themselves. So cyanobacteria, as part of these algae, are some of those bacteria that will use sunlight to make food. And in order to get that sunlight, they have to become colorful, which is why they end up being blue or green. So, but another distinction I want to point out is a lot of algae is also similar to plants. So the small bacteria are separate from the small, tiny plant algae that live in lakes or ponds and stuff. But both of them will actually live together, and they both use sunlight to get their food. So thanks for that question. That was a great one. Any others that came in, Brianna, at the end?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, so I think we will end the live stream there. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you all for your participation. Hope you have